Hello again. This is Arnold Mangioli for Grateful, Ready, Open, Willing. And I am once again just delighted beyond measure to be with the legendary Sande Campbell. And this session, we're going to talk a little bit about composers and lyricists, Broadway writing teams, because Sande has been at the piano for so many of them. And we talked about your experience at the piano with the guys from Hair, where they handed you that lead sheet and were like, I don't know, it has no chords, play something. And you did. And you always did. In auditions over the years, actors would occasionally come in. I resource people from everywhere. So I would bring in people who would show up with just a lead sheet, and you'd say, all right, come here for a moment, and you'd talk with them about what they wanted, and then you'd make it up, and it always worked. So I know that you do that, but let's talk and do it better than anyone that I've ever known and know to this day. So I'm curious, let's start with Leonard Bernstein. What do you remember about working with Lenny?
Loved him, adored him. I did a show called Leonard Bernstein's Theater Songs at the Theater de Lys, maybe the 70s. I can't ever, it's all kind of a blur of the years. And it was a three character musical. It was one guy and two women. And Mickey Grant was one of the women who I told you was, and also, I don't know their names. I just hated that I lose everything. And then a guy from Canada was the guy. He ended up making the movie of how are things in Kakamora?
Finian's Rainbow, right? Yeah.
The movie of Finning's Rainbow
Okay.
as Woody in the movie.
Woody.
The,
All right.
Not at anyway.
In the movie, wasn't it Fred Astaire? No, he wasn't Woody.
As the older guy, but the Woody was the young boy, the young guy who
Okay.
someone with him, whatever. So anyway, he was in the, so that was the three people. And pisses me off. I can't remember her name. I loved her so much. She married the orchestrator, Tunic. She married Tunic.
Well, Don Franks was Woody in the movie.
Was Don France.
I'm cheating and looking it up. Okay.
And so anyway, whoever, can you look up who the girl was in the Leonard Bernstein song?
I'm looking, but tell us about Lenny.
Okay, so we rehearsed in the theater, and that's on just Christopher Street. And every day, at some point, Lenny would come to the rehearsals, and he'd come in through the front door, and he would wear a black cape with red silk lining as he came flying down the aisle to come to the stage where we were, and he was always had a bodyguard, huge bodyguard, who was where everywhere he went that I saw him was the bodyguard, and we just called him Joe. I don't know why, if that was his name or not, but that's what we called him. And so he would come in, and Joe would take the cape and hold it, and Lenny would go sit down. The stage is not very high there,
right?
So, and you could just lean against it or sit down on it. And we all smoked it. So we had ashtrays everywhere. So, and Lenny smoked. And so we'd sit on the stage, and he'd tell us stuff. He'd tell us stories about what he was doing. And he was always very vibrant and a storyteller. He was a great storyteller. And he would say what he was doing or what he was into, and wanted to know, what are you doing? Okay, what do you, and he was always curious about what everybody else had to say. And if we had any ideas about a different version of the song that he wrote, and that was not the version that he wrote, but he wanted to hear what we'd like to do. We had such total freedom to bring in our own musicality to it. Everybody was free, and it had all new arrangements, a lot of new arrangements. Glitter and Big Gay was what Lenny wrote.
What he wrote, yeah.
But there were plenty of songs that we did arrangements of. There's a place for us. We did unka junka like the Cowboys. I don't know why, but we did it. So
Fabulous.
then I was a musical director, but it's kind of unofficially because Fred Werner was the musical director, was the plant, and he had hired me to cover this job until he was free from another show he was doing. Whatever he was doing, he wasn't free. And so I covered the job, and I did all the rehearsals, I did all the coaching, all the whatever musical choices. I always told him what I was doing, but anyway, I was free to do it and free with Lenny to do it. And the night before I was supposed to, the night before we opened, after we'd played the show, let's say Saturday night we did the show, and Sunday we were opening. Um, and the producer called me and said, um, uh, "You can't do the show tomorrow. Freddie has to come in and do the show. Freddie Werner has to do the show and play the piano for the show. You can't do it." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because the reviewers won't like having a girl on stage.
Wow.
It should be a guy." So yes, he had never played one performance of the show. Never. He had very little to do with it because he had this other job that he was doing. So they said, "So you can't do it." So never mind for the opening for the reviewers. So I went, "Well, okay, this is not the first time it happened with girls. Girls had a lot of
Sure.
problems."
Yeah, people don't realize. I mean, in some ways it seems like, well, that was 50 years ago, but in other ways it was only 50 years ago. I mean, it's Broadway that is in memory of most of us, and these were the things that happened.
So what happened is that as soon as it was a woman producer too, it's a woman. And so Freddie called and said, "Oh my God, I can't. What are you going to do?" And I'm sorry, I didn't ask. I didn't want to do this. And he said, and he had never ever played Trouble in Tahiti, which was the second act, a big section. It's a 25-minute musical.
Yeah.
He had never played it ever. And he said, "I can't do Trouble in Tahiti." And so I sat in the front row by the piano, and the drums and the bass were on stage, on stage left, audience right.
Yeah.
And so I sat in the front row right there, and the stairs are right there. And during the blackout, he came down the stairs, and I went up the stairs, and they kept the lights off of me, so nobody again noticed that it was a girl. Just like, you know. So, and I played that, and then I snuck down. Well, in the program, it says musical director Sandy Campbell, right? Sandy Campbell is a neutral, generic
Yes.
name.
And you spell it Sande, so they wouldn't know if that were a male Sandy or a female Sandy.
No, and I got a bad review. It said Sandy Campbell. Uh, it sounded like he had never rehearsed with these people before.
Because it was Fred playing.
Yeah, I got a bad review because Sandy Campbell he thought was a guy. That his friend's name wasn't on the program. I got a bad review. Walter Kerr gave me a bad review.
My God.
So we went that night after we went to the party afterwards. And I see Lenny at the party, and I went, and he said, "Where were you?" And I said, "They wouldn't let me play." He said, "What?" I said, "They called me last night and told me I couldn't play. They didn't want a girl on the stage." He said, uh, "Stay there." And he went wherever he went, and he came back and he said, "They all apologize. You're on tomorrow. You're going to do the show from now on."
Wow. Wow. If only he had been made aware of it before opening night.
Me too. I guess
Yeah.
I guess I didn't tell him that.
Great
I got a
story.
review for Walter Kerr.
And Walter Kerr has a theater named after him. Where's the Sandy Campbell Theater? That's my question.
Yes.
Oh my Lord, that is extraordinary. Wow. Great story. Thank you.
He loved him. He would sit there and we'd all smoke together, and then we'd play a little. And sometimes he would play, sometimes I would play. We'd just all play. And he'd say, "Oh, how
Yeah.
about this?" And he'd try something, and I'd say, "Okay." Well, and we just did stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's, it's evident in his work. He's an experimenter, trying things kind of person. He's not a stodgy. His work is not stodgy in the way of I wrote this and it must be this way. His
Never
work lives and breathes.
do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, who's another favorite composer you've worked with? I have a few in mind to ask you about, but who comes to mind for you?
I want to know what you're thinking of. I'm still
Okay.
trying to figure out who Jonathan Tunick's wife is. She's a singer. She's great, beautiful girl. She was
I'll,
a model. I
I'll
want.
look that up.
I
I'll
love.
look that up. And you tell us about working with Kander and Ebb.
Oh, yes. Well, I didn't actually work with Canada. Strangely enough, um,
Lee Barry is Jonathan's wife.
huh?
Lee Barry.
Yes, Lee Berry,
Jonathan.
beautiful soprano. She was a model, and I think Chicago's where she came from. But this beautiful soprano voice, yeah, I loved her. Okay, thank you for telling me that.
Yes.
I worked with. See, you have to remember that I was like very low key. I didn't want to draw attention to myself because they would kick me out and bring a boy in. You
That's
know,
why we're doing this, because it's the 21st century now and we like girls. So let's just get it going. Tell us your stories.
I kept. I didn't make friends of anybody. I wasn't going to make any waves anywhere. I wasn't going to have anybody complain about me. I just wanted to do my job really, really well, and have the joy of doing my job, and not look for other stuff. Okay, so I would say hello to whoever was there, or whoever spoke to me. But I never sat down and said, "Hey, so what's that?" I just never. And that was my way of protecting myself from being in trouble. And so the best story I have of
John
Fred,
and Freddie, yeah.
Mr. Fred, it was at when
Ron Field,
Ron Field,
yeah,
and there was,
choreographer.
yeah, there was a memorial at the theater for him. At, I don't remember which theater. We're in a theater, and 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 so Fred asked me if I would um, accompany him because John was out of town and wouldn't be able to come back in time to do the funeral. And so I went over to his house, which was a great apartment on the west, on Central Park West.
Yep.
I
Yeah.
love that apartment. So with another grand piano. So I went over there and rehearsed with him, and then the day of the funeral, I was waiting in the wings with for Fred to get ready to do his number. And Sheeta came in because she was going to say something, um, and 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 Fred was so nervous, and he turned to her to Cheetah and said, I can't do this. I don't, he doesn't sing, he doesn't perform, he's a writer."
Yeah.
And so Cheetah stood there and held one hand, and I took the other hand, and the three of us stayed brave through because it's very sad, of course, that Ron died. I mean, we were all unhappy. So uh, we held on to him, and Cheetah hugged him and held on to him until it was time for him to go on stage and do that number. And that's my memory with Fred, was
Mm.
how frightened he was, and how he had Cheetah, who loved him so, to take care of him and keep him brave enough to come in and do that number for Ron. It's a family.
Mm.
It's such a beautiful family. Everybody really cares about everybody.
Yeah.
I
That's
love.
the theater I grew up in and want to be a part of.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much, wonderful Sandy Campbell, legendary Sandy Campbell, the very humbled by this experience, Arnold Mangioli, for grateful, ready, open, willing. Thanking everyone for joining us. And maybe we'll get just one more. I'm hoping. Okay.